the scratching that came from inside the walls. Marcus had lived in Pelican Bay's SHU long enough to know one rule. The walls do not make noise. They don't creak, they don't settle, and they definitely don't scratch. But on his 63rd night in isolation, he shot awake to a sound that made the hair on his arm stand straight up. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It wasn't fast or wild. It was slow, careful, like someone tracing a shape onto the concrete from inside the wall. Marcus held his breath. The scratching slid downward behind his bunk, paused, then moved sideways, following the exact line where his head rested when he slept. His entire body started shaking. No one could be in the walls. The SHU is solid concrete. There are no crawl spaces, no hidden openings, nothing. But then a soft whisper came through the wall, so close it felt like a mouth was inches from his ear. "Don't move." Marcus stumbled backward, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking the entire cell. He didn't know what the voice was, or who it belonged to, but something behind that wall was alive enough to whisper. And the worst part? The scratching started again, moving closer. Welcome to the SHU, a world built to break you. To understand why that scratching terrified Marcus so deeply, you first have to understand what the SHU really is. Pelican Bay Security Housing Unit isn't just a prison inside a prison. It's a world designed to erase sound, erase movement, and erase the idea of being human. It begins the moment the steel door shuts behind you. No windows to look out of, no voices, no sunlight. Just a concrete box the size of a small bathroom and the echoes of your own breathing. For most men, the first few days feel like punishment. But by day 3, Marcus learned something different. The SHU isn't built to punish your body. It's built to rearrange your mind. Time behaves strangely in a place where nothing changes. Minutes stretch. Hours twist. Days blend into each other, like wet ink on paper. Marcus would close his eyes for what felt like a moment, and wake up unsure if it had been 10 minutes or 3 hours. Each morning began the same way. A loud metal clank as the breakfast tray slid through the slot. The food was always unpredictable. Some days hot, some days ice cold, some days barely edible. But the routine itself was what anchored you. A tray meant the day existed. A tray meant someone remembered you were alive. So when breakfast came late, even by a few minutes, panic slid under Marcus's skin like cold water. After eating, he'd pace the same 10 steps back and forth across the cell. It was the only form of exercise the SHU allowed. 10 steps forward. Turn. 10 steps back. Over and over until his legs burned. It wasn't to stay fit. It was to stay sane. In a place where nothing happens, movement becomes survival. But even pacing didn't stop the feeling of being watched, especially through the thin air vent high on the wall. That vent became the most important and most terrifying part of the cell. It carried every sound from other units. Every cough, every whisper, every secret. Some nights Marcus would hear faint tapping patterns. Quick, coded knocks inmates used to communicate through the pipes. Other nights, the vent felt like it was breathing warm air into his cell or pulling cold air out. It didn't scare him at first. But after what happened in the hook, after the scratching inside the wall, after the whisper telling him don't move, Marcus started noticing something new. Whenever he stared at the vent for too long, the air changed temperature on its own. Something inside the SHU was paying attention to him, and it was learning. If you're ready to go deeper into Pelican Bay, when the silence started acting strange, after the night of scratching behind the wall, Marcus listened to every sound with new ears. The SHU was supposed to be silent, but now the silence felt like it was doing something, watching him, following him, waiting. Even the rhythm of the guards' footsteps, normally steady and predictable, felt off. They walked faster, quieter, like they didn't want to stay in the hallway longer than necessary. When the breakfast tray arrived, it didn't slam like usual. It slid in slowly, almost gently, as if the guard didn't want to make any noise. Marcus hesitated before touching it. The food looked normal, cold oatmeal, dry toast, and a bruised apple, but the tray itself was vibrating slightly, like someone had held it too tight before letting go. He pushed it away and waited. In Pelican Bay, Skipping a meal could cost you your strength, but eating the wrong meal could cost you something worse. For the first time, Marcus realized how much he relied on small sounds to stay sane. The clank of tray, the hum of air through the vent, the distant knock from another inmate. Now those sounds were disappearing one by one. The vent no longer carried voices. The hallway no longer echoed. Even the usual metal pops in the walls seemed to quiet down, like the entire unit was trying to hide. Marcus sat on the edge of his bunk and pressed his palms against the mattress. Even the bed felt heavier than before, as if the concrete beneath it was shifting. He knew that couldn't be true. The SHU was built like a bunker, but fear and isolation makes your senses do strange things. Every vibration, every shadow, every faint tap became a message he wasn't sure how to read. Then the silence broke, not with a shout, not with footsteps, but with a soft, steady tapping behind the wall, the same place the scratching had started the night before. 3 taps, a pause, then one more. It wasn't random. It was a signal. Marcus pressed his ear to the wall, heart racing. And for the first time, another inmate whispered to the concrete, a faint voice, worn and shaking. If you hear the tapping, don't answer it. The day the vent stopped breathing. The next morning felt different before Marcus even opened his eyes. The SHU always had a faint hum, the constant airflow that reminded inmates they were still part of a functioning system. But today, the air was still, completely still. No hum, no breeze, no movement. It was like waking up inside a sealed box. Marcus sat up slowly, realizing the vent wasn't pushing air or pulling it. He moved closer to the wall, careful not to look directly into the vent. The warning from the night before, "Don't tap back," still echoed in his mind. His hand hovered near the metal slits, waiting to feel even the smallest draft. Nothing, not cold, not warm, just dead air, in a place as controlled as the SHU. That kind of change didn't happen by accident. Something was blocking the airflow or replacing it. Marcus stepped away and listened. The silence was too thick, too heavy, like the entire tier was wrapped in insulation. He pressed his ear against the wall and waited. No footsteps, no doors, no voices. Even the pipes didn't make noise. It was a kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound like thunder, and Marcus could hear every thump echo in his skull. Then he remembered something another inmate whispered weeks ago. When events go quiet, it means it's getting close. Marcus dismissed it as paranoia back then, but now the words came back with a weight that made his skin crawl. If something was getting close, then it was already inside the walls, already moving, already learning the layout of the cells, one by one. He backed into the center of the room, away from the bed, away from the vent, away from the concrete corners where strange noises always seemed to start. His breathing grew shaky. The air felt thick, heavy, wrong, like the cell was slowly filling with invisible pressure. Marcus didn't know if he should sit, stand, or stay perfectly still. Everything felt like a test. Then, without warning, a soft click echoed from inside the vent. A tiny metal sound, almost like someone unlocking something from the other side. Marcus froze. That wasn't airflow returning. That was movement. The guard who wouldn't step near his door. Not long after the vent made that soft unlocking sound, Marcus heard faint footsteps down the hall, the first real noise in hours. He rushed to the door and peered through the narrow slit. A guard was approaching, but something about him was off. He wasn't walking with the usual heavy stride. His shoulders were tight. His eyes darted around like he was trying not to look at anything for too long. As the guard reached Marcus's cell, he slowed down, then stopped several feet short of the door. Normally, guards walked right up to the slot, shoved the tray in, and moved on. But this guard stayed back, swallowing hard, staring at Marcus's door as if it were dangerous. Marcus had seen fear in inmates before, never in staff. Guards were trained to be emotionless in the SHU. But this one looked like he wanted to turn around and run. The guard held the tray in both hands. His fingers trembled so badly that the metal lid rattled against the plastic. He didn't call out Marcus's name or tell him to step back. He simply bent down, slid the tray along the floor from a distance, and kicked it gently so it would reach the slot. Not once did he get close enough to touch the door itself. That had never happened before, not in Marcus's entire stay. Marcus stared at him, confused and worried. "What's going on?" he whispered quietly through the slot. The guard's eyes widened. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he shook his head sharply, a quick, desperate motion as if saying, "Don't ask. Don't talk. Don't look." Then he backed away. Not turned, backed away, keeping his eyes on the vent above Marcus's door, as if he was afraid something might drop down at any second. By the time he disappeared down the hall, the entire tier felt different, colder, heavier, like the unit itself knew something was wrong, and was waiting for the next move to happen. Marcus looked at the tray on the floor and realized he was more afraid of eating than starving. Meals were sealed tight. Always. He lifted the lid slowly. The food inside looked normal. Cold potatoes, dried vegetables, a slice of bread. But Marcus felt something was off. He pushed the potatoes gently with his plastic spoon, and that's when he saw it. A tiny piece of folded paper wedged beneath the bread, half buried like someone tried to hide it quickly. Paper notes were impossible in the SHU. No one had access to them. No one could pass them. But someone had. Marcus looked around the cell instinctively, even though he knew no one could see inside without a key. His heart hammered against his ribs as he unfolded the tiny note. It wasn't written with a pen. It was scratched using something sharp. The letters were uneven, desperate, carved instead of drawn. "Don't sleep tonight." Marcus felt his throat close. Don't sleep? Why? Was something coming? Something moving through the vents again? Something behind the walls? He pressed the note flat against the bed frame, staring at it over and over, hoping it meant something different. But it didn't. Whoever wrote it had risked everything to pass it to him, meaning the warning was real and serious. Marcus backed away from the tray, hands trembling. The food, the guard, the vents, everything was connected, but he couldn't figure out how. He sat on the cold floor listening, really listening for the first time. At first, nothing. Then, very faint, almost too soft to notice. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Somewhere deep inside the wall again. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't close his eyes tonight. The night the lights wouldn't stay on. Marcus spent the next few hours sitting upright on his bunk, gripping the edge of the mattress with both hands. The note, "Don't sleep tonight," replayed in his mind over and over until even blinking felt dangerous. Every few minutes, he checked the vent, the walls, the slot under the door. Nothing moved, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that hides something. Around 11:40 p.m., the overhead light flickered. Once, twice, then it dimmed for a solid 3 seconds before coming back on at half strength. Marcus's pulse jumped. The lights in the SHU were supposed to be industrial, reliable, designed so inmates never had shadows to hide in. Flickering meant interference. Someone messing with the power, or something inside the system itself. He stood slowly listening. No guards, no voices, no alarms. The entire tier fell asleep, even though Marcus knew nobody else could afford to sleep tonight. He moved toward the center of the cell, away from the vent and away from the wall where the scratching had begun. Every instinct screamed that he should stay where the light touched the floor. Then, without warning, the light cut out completely. Total darkness swallowed the room. The kind of darkness where you can't see your hands in front of your face. Marcus held his breath as the concrete seemed to close in around him. He took one slow step back and froze. Something was breathing, not from the vent, not from the hallway, from inside his cell. Slow, steady breathing like someone was standing inches away. The light snapped back on. Marcus spun toward the sound. But no one was there. Nobody could have entered. Nobody had keys. Nobody could move silently enough to avoid the floor sensors. And yet, the center of the cell felt colder, like someone had been standing there just seconds before. Marcus sank onto the bunk, shaking. If the warning said not to sleep, and the lights were failing, and something was entering the cell unseen, then night in the SHU was only just beginning. The return of the footsteps above the ceiling. Marcus stayed awake long after the blackout ended, gripping the edge of his bunk like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. The room still felt cold in the center, as if something invisible had moved through it. He didn't dare turn off the light. He didn't dare lie down. Every sound, even his own breathing, felt louder, sharper, like the SHU was amplified on purpose. Then, just when he thought the cell might finally settle into silence, a new sound emerged. Slow, measured, heavy. Footsteps, but not on the floor. These steps came from above the ceiling, crossing the concrete overhead like someone walking inside the space between the floors, a space every inmate knew didn't exist. The SHU was solid. No crawl spaces. No open ducts large enough for a person. Yet the steps continued, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other in a steady rhythm. Marcus stared up at the ceiling, heart pounding. The footsteps paused directly above him. The concrete vibrated gently, dust falling in thin streams right onto his shoulders. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe too deeply. It felt like the presence above him was listening, waiting for a reaction, waiting for him to acknowledge it. The footsteps shifted again, this time circling the center of the ceiling slowly, the way a person might pace when deciding what to do next. Marcus pressed his back against the far wall, trying to put as much distance as he could between himself and whatever was moving above. The warning echoed in his mind. Don't sleep tonight. Minutes passed. Then the footsteps stopped completely. Silence. Stillness. No movement at all. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt loaded, like something was crouched just on the other side of the concrete, waiting for him to make a single mistake. Marcus tightened his fists. If the footsteps were real, and the breathing was real, and the scratching inside the walls was real, then something in Pelican Bay's SHU wasn't following the rules anymore. The vent that knew his name. Marcus stayed in the corner of his cell long after the footsteps stopped above his ceiling. His heartbeat was loud enough that he thought whatever was in the walls would hear it. But the SHU stayed strangely calm for several minutes. No steps, no scratching, no flickering lights. It was a kind of calm that felt like a setup, like the moment before a trap snapped shut. Slowly, he forced himself to take a few steps toward the center of the room. He needed to check the vent again. He needed to make sure it was still closed, that nothing had pushed through. As he got closer, the air temperature shifted slightly. Warm, then cold, then warm again. He didn't touch the vent, but he could feel something behind it, watching, waiting. Then, out of nowhere, he heard a soft whisper, not from the wall, not from under the door, but from the vent itself. Marcus. He froze. His stomach dropped. No one in the SHU was allowed to speak names out loud. Inmates didn't call each other by name through vents. Too risky. Too many rules. Too many punishments. But the voice said again, a little louder this time, "Marcus, don't move." His feet felt glued to the floor. Whoever or whatever was in the vent wasn't whispering randomly. It knew him. It knew which cell he was in. It knew exactly where he was standing. Marcus tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. He opened his mouth, and only air came out. The whisper grew sharper, almost urgent now. "Get away from the bed." Marcus didn't think. He just moved. The thing under the bunk. Marcus moved fast, backing away from the bunk until he hit the far wall. His pulse hammered against his ribs. He didn't know what was happening under that bed, but he knew it wasn't just the building settling. The SHU was concrete, solid, silent. Nothing inside it was supposed to move. And yet, the bunk frame gave a long, slow creak like something heavy was pressing against it from the underside. The vent stayed quiet now. No more whispering his name. No warnings. That silence felt worse than the voice. Like whatever had spoken had already done what it came to do. Marcus kept his eyes on the space beneath the bunk. It was too dark to see. The shadows swallowed everything. But the metal frame shifted again, rising no more than half an inch before settling back into place. Marcus tried to will himself to stay calm. Maybe it was air pressure. Maybe it was the concrete expanding. Maybe the lies weren't helping. He knew what he heard. He knew what he felt. And now, he could swear he saw something, a faint movement in the darkest space beneath the bed. Not large. Not fast. just enough to let him know he wasn't alone in the room. Slowly, he crouched down, not to look, but to listen. His breath caught in his throat. The sound coming from under the bunk wasn't scratching this time. It wasn't tapping. It was breathing. Soft, thin, broken breathing like someone trying to stay silent, but struggling not to gasp. Marcus stumbled backward again, nearly tripping over his own feet. No human could be under there. The gap was too small, barely a few inches tall. And yet the breathing continued, steady, patient, as if waiting for him to get close enough to reach. The SHU suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were pushing inward, sealing him into the cell with something that wasn't supposed to exist. And then, without warning, a single handprint appeared in the dust on the floor, right beside the bunk. The moment the handprint moved, Marcus stared at the handprint on the floor, his heartbeat exploding in his chest. It wasn't old dust or a leftover smudge. It was fresh, perfectly shaped. 5 clear fingers pressed into the concrete powder, as if a real hand had touched the ground just seconds ago. But nothing human could fit under the bunk. Nothing with a body. Nothing with lungs. And yet, the breathing underneath him had been unmistakably alive. He forced himself not to blink, not even once. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The SHU wasn't built for escape. It was built for containment. And whatever was in the cell was now sharing the same air, the same space, the same silence with him. Marcus pressed his back to the wall, barely daring to breathe. Then the handprint twitched, just a little, just enough to drag one fingertip through the dust. Marcus's legs went weak. The movement wasn't large enough to be violent. It was slow, careful, controlled, the kind of movement something makes when it's testing its surroundings, when it's learning, when it's adjusting to the room. The silence around Marcus thickened, so hard it felt like pressure against his ears. He tried calling out, "Guard, guard." But the moment he spoke, the breathing under the bunk stopped. Completely. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It was too sudden, too sharp, like the unseen presence had frozen mid-movement, listening to him. Marcus clamped a hand over his mouth, terrified that even breathing too loudly might wake whatever was beneath him. After a full minute of stillness, the bunk creaked again, not upward this time, but downward, like something heavy had settled back into place under it. Dust puffed from the edges of the frame, rising in a thin cloud. Marcus could feel it. Whatever was under the bed wasn't leaving. It was waiting for something. Maybe for him to move closer. Maybe for the lights to go out again. Maybe for the next time he closed his eyes. His whole body trembled as he slid into the corner of the cell, curling his knees to his chest. The SHU was supposed to be a place where nothing changed, but now even the concrete was acting alive. And Marcus knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just fear. This was a warning. The eye at the door slot. Marcus barely slept the previous night, curling into the farthest corner of his cell, staring at the bunk as if it might lift off the ground again. He waited for more footsteps, more breathing, more scratching, but nothing came. The silence that filled the SHU afterward wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, like the calm you get before lightning hits. Every second stretched out, heavy and watching. By morning, Marcus's nerves were shot. The breakfast tray slid under his door with an unusual smoothness. No sound, no shadow of a guard passing. It was like someone had slid it from a distance. He didn't touch it. After everything that happened, the warning note, the handprint, the breathing, the last thing he trusted was food. He pushed the tray back out, and as he did, he felt it, a faint air shift from the bottom of the door. He leaned forward, slowly lowering himself to look through the food slot, just enough to see the hallway floor. It looked normal, empty, but as he blinked, something moved, a blur at the very edge of the metal frame. Not a foot, not a shadow, something closer, something right up against the slot. The air thickened. The hair on Marcus's neck stood up. Someone or something was crouched on the other side of the door. A soft exhale drifted through the opening, brushing his cheek like a cold breeze. Marcus jerked back. The SHU hallway was supposed to be patrolled constantly by guards. always moving, never still. But whatever was at the slot wasn't moving away. It wasn't leaving. It was waiting, listening, breathing. Marcus forced himself to lower down again, heart beating so hard he could hear it. He leaned in just far enough to glance, and that's when he saw it. A pale shape, inches from the slot. Not a face, not a hand, just a single eye staring straight into the cell through the narrow opening. It blinked once, slowly, deliberately. Marcus collapsed backward, breath shaking, knees hitting the floor. Whatever was outside his door knew exactly where he was. It wasn't random. It wasn't confused. It was watching him directly, and it wasn't going away. What never left the SHU, and what followed him out. When Marcus was eventually moved out of the SHU weeks later, people called it release. But Marcus knew better. No one gets released from Pelican Bay's isolation unit. You just get relocated, and whatever the SHU took from you stays missing forever. Even outside those walls, Marcus found himself listening for things he wished he could forget. Flickers in the lights, scratches behind thin apartment walls, the soft hum events at night. Normal sounds for normal people, but not to him. To Marcus, every sound felt like a warning. He learned to sleep with the lights on. He never let his bed touch the wall. He refused to look directly into air vents. People thought it was trauma. They didn't understand the truth. He wasn't afraid of the past. He was afraid it wasn't finished. Because on his third night out, he woke suddenly, not to a noise, not to a dream, but to a familiar shift in the room's air pressure. Warm, then cold, then still. The same pattern the SHU had taught him to fear. Marcus sat up slowly, terrified to look anywhere, terrified not to look. And in the faint glow of the hallway light, leaking under the door, he saw small grains of dust sliding across the floor, forming a thin curved line, leading straight toward his bed. He realized then, Pelican Bay didn't just hold people. It held things. And some things don't stay behind concrete forever. Marcus whispered into darkness, voice shaking. "You're still here, aren't you?" The room didn't answer. It breathed.